Hello, BookTube. For many months now, Matthew at Mayberry Book Club and I have changed his channel name into a reality and made a little book club of two where we have read a whole wide variety of things and enjoyed the whole process. And one of the things that we've read often in our little Mayberry Book Club were graphic novels. And I think that's what emboldened Matthew to make our choice for April. And he insisted on it. He stomped his foot. He tossed his hair, influencer style, and insisted that we read this, Avengers Forever, written by Kurt Busiek and drawn by Carlos Pacheco. This is a 12-issue miniseries from 30 years ago. It's an epic time travel story involving the Avengers. I know you recognize Captain America and maybe the Black Panther on this cover. You probably don't recognize anybody else, but they're all Avengers of one kind or another. And we were casting around for ideas, and I mentioned, well, you know, with a different reading partner, in a different circumstance, in a totally different venue and environment, I might recommend Avengers Forever. It is a great Avengers story, but it's totally for dyed-in-the-wool criminologist Avengers followers, people who've been following the Avengers and reading the letters column and trying to win no prizes since the early 1960s. That's the only way that it works. Either you've been along for the ride that whole time and you love this series, or you have steeped yourself in the literature since then and loved this series. Matthew has done neither. So I told him this wouldn't work for our book club of two because you would find every page of it to be completely incomprehensible. It is entirely a highly detailed love letter to people who have been reading the Avengers literally forever. And that just made him madder. You know how these influencers get. He insisted that no one's going to tell him what he can and cannot read. So we've been reading Avengers Forever. And because misery loves company, we dragged in Michael K. Vaughan to read it with us, who's in kind of the middle ground between myself and Matthew. Matthew did not follow the Avengers from the very beginning. I did. And Michael is in between and hasn't read this in quite some time. So we are going through it, and as of this video, our long national nightmare is over. As of this video, we are finishing Avengers Forever. So I'm going to try to synopsize this thing before we assess the conclusion. And that's going to be hard to do, because this is a big, insane, meth-fueled story that doesn't make any sense, as time travel stories never do. How can you have a climax in a time travel story? If people can have a climax in a time travel story, why didn't they have it on page 1? That definitely applies in the case of this storyline, but the Avengers, you know that. You know who they are. They're a gigantic super team. And in the comics continuity, they've been around for a long time. Usually the comics these days have drifted away from giving specific indicators of time. It's sort of generally known that some characters are older than others, and there are signposts. For instance, Captain America fought in World War II. And then fell into suspended animation. But instead of falling into suspended animation for 20 years, like he did when Stan Lee first reintroduced him in Avengers #4, it's longer than that. And that span of time where he was in suspended animation will just get longer and longer. I don't think Marvel will ever do violence enough to the character to say that he fought in, like, the Vietnam War or something like that. Although, considering the fact that Marvel's current crop of editors and especially creators don't know anything about Marvel history and don't care about it, it could be. It could absolutely happen. It could be that Captain America fought in the Stonewall riots and was in suspended animation until just the other day. I'll wait for that horrific travesty to happen when it does, but right now he's a fixed point. But all the others aren't. Like, for instance, forever and ever, it was Marvel continuity that Reed Richards and Ben Grimm of the Fantastic Four had fought in World War II. So the same conflict in which Captain America and Nick Fury fought, and they just lived. They didn't go into suspended animation. They got no miracle drugs. They just lived. Would have made them roughly early middle-aged men in the 1960s, which was fine by Stan Lee. He didn't think anything of it himself. But it, of course, needs tweaking if you're going to keep that product going. Nevertheless, there are different eras in Avengers history, and Kurt Busiek, the writer of Avengers Forever, decided to have a little fun by assembling a core cast of Avengers for his story that are plucked from different eras in time, different eras in Avengers history, just so he could play around with the different personalities instead of having just the same old 7 Avengers. Since he wanted to do that, the storyline that he came up with involves time travel. And when you are reading the Avengers, if you're thinking time travel, you are thinking about 2 main characters, 2 villains. one named Immortus and one named Kang the Conqueror, both of whom are from the future. In later Avengers continuity, it turns out they are the same person, that Kang eventually grows up into Immortus, that eons after the time in which he is Kang the Conqueror, he is Immortus, and they can afflict the Avengers equally because they can move through time. Okay, fine. Right. Writers did that and thought nothing of it. And as we've seen in previous recaps for Avengers Forever, Kurt Busiek is playing with that continuity. He's moving pieces around. He's setting up what he considers to be the definitive story of Kang the Conqueror, who is, in my opinion, the main character of this story. Not an Avenger at all, but one of their most notable villains. That very notable villain will be completely emasculated and tossed away as a joke in the new phase of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But I won't be watching, so I won't have to care. I will only have to care about epic appearances by this character, whether it's trying to take over the 19th century in the Old West of America, or whether it's the Celestial Madonna storyline, or any other of the great stories that Kang has appeared in. This is the culmination of all those. This is Kurt Busiek saying, who is this character? And is it possible that although he is a villain from the Avengers' point of view, he himself is an interesting three-dimensional character? He sets out to do that. That's not always easy to do. Trust me, you can't do that with a lot of villains. But you, it turns out, can do it with Kang the Conqueror if you're as talented as Kurt Busiek is. We saw in the last recap that his chapter devoted to cleaning up the timeline and establishing the definitive history of Kang the Conqueror makes the character fantastic by the end. It doesn't just clean up the continuity, it gives us a character actually to root for. Which of us hasn't felt the howling urge to fight against what seems to be our inevitable fates? That is a great motivation for a character. That is a great conception of who Kang the Conqueror is. It doesn't fit with Kang's original envisioning by Stan Lee or any other writers, but it works really well in the context of Avengers Forever. And in the larger plot of this story, Immortus has been tasked by three weird, towering beings called the Timekeepers to manipulate past events in Earth history and in Avengers history to prevent mankind from reaching out into the stars. Because at one point that happened. Earth was embroiled in the Kree-Skrull War, a war between two intergalactic civilizations, and in the course of that war, the Avengers' annoying sidekick, Rick Jones, taps into something called the Destiny Force. That is apparently the energy-based realization of the untapped genetic potential of all human beings. That doesn't exist. That isn't true. That is a very bad elementary school misunderstanding of evolution by means of natural selection. But it works a little more neatly if we consider it to be an individual superpower of Rick Jones. According to these Timekeepers, a descendant of Rick Jones using that power and using the shock troops that are patterned on the Avengers goes out to conquer the entire universe and subjugate it. And they don't want that to happen. They tasked Immortus with mucking with the time stream and with the Avengers themselves to prevent that from happening. And one of the X factors involved in doing that is Immortus' younger self, Kang, who is constantly fighting with the Avengers, to good or ill effect of his ultimate purpose. But the more Kang learns about that ultimate purpose, the less he likes it. He doesn't like the fact of turning into his future self, who he constantly, witheringly describes as a writer, a scribe, an effete academic. When Kang is a man of action. Naturally, that digs a little if you're a writer by profession. But not only does he not want to become that, but he certainly doesn't want to be what he perceives Immortus to be, which is a lickspittle, a lackey of three, extra-chronal goons, the Timekeepers. Who are they to give him orders, to give anybody orders? Who are they to limit humanity, which is the argument that Captain America and the Avengers make in the issues that we're reading today? They ask the Timekeepers outright, well, you know all the different timelines, all the different alternate universes. In how many of those timelines do the Avengers, under this all-powerful descendant of Rick Jones, become an intergalactic threat? And the Timekeepers say it's fewer than 50%. It's around 40%, if that. And the Avengers, Captain America and the Avengers, are rightly outraged that you're willing to wipe out so much in order to prevent something that isn't even certain. What kind of monsters are you? And in that conclusion, in the issues that we're reading today, you're not reading, of course. All of you have long since given up and retreated into the corner in a twitching ball. But in the conclusion that we're reading today, Immortus argues with his bosses. He argues with the timekeepers. He says, I'm sure there is a way to get you what you want without eradicating the Avengers. He's grown, in his own way, fond of them. Considering his history with one or two of them, Ms. Marvel in particular, I don't doubt that he's become fond of them. He doesn't want that to happen. He's not a bloodthirsty maniac. In their own odd ways, neither is Kang. And when he says that to the timekeepers in the concluding issues that we're reading today, the timekeepers respond by killing him. They kill him. They turn him to dust. Instantly. At will. This is Immortus that we're talking about. He appears to have not the slightest ability to stop them. Doesn't know that it's coming. Can't forestall it by even a fraction of a second. In the heat of battle, in the final issues, they simply kill him for disobeying them. And I know what you're asking. Didn't they know he was going to say that? Didn't they know they were going to kill him? If so, why didn't they kill him a long time ago and spare themselves the trouble of a battle, the trouble of hauling alternate Avengers from 1,000 different timelines to fight the crowd of alternate Avengers that Rick Jones hauls from 1,000 different timelines? Why did they go to the bother of all that if they knew it was going to happen? And the same thing is true for their next step, which is, well, Immortus said no. So what we'll do is we'll use our chronal abilities to force transform Kang into Immortus right now, without waiting the intervening however many years. We'll just make him into Immortus now. Only, I guess, an Immortus who will say yes instead of no. It'll still be the same person. So I don't know why they're expecting that he'll suddenly say, yeah, sure, wipe them all out instead of no, there's got to be another way. Why do you think they aren't just causing that to happen again 15 minutes after it happened the first time? And if they can force transform Kang into Immortus and think they're going to get a good result that way, then why didn't they kill Immortus and transform Kang in his sleep 40 years ago? Instead, they try to transform him when he's in full fighting fury. He's in the middle of a gigantic battle at the end of this series, and he doesn't want to go. To paraphrase Doctor Who, he doesn't want to become Immortus. He fights the process. How he does it, we're not so sure. It could be advanced, technological circuitry in his armor, but I think it's his strength of will. The Avengers are watching. They're fighting for their own life against the alternate timeline counterparts of themselves, but they're also watching this struggle, and they feel sorry for Kang. It sounds like he's in agony. Eventually, though, he wins. Now, I want to show you that epic battle at the end is absolutely necessary for an Avengers epic. You're going to have huge fight scenes at the end, and Carlos Pacheco does not disappoint. He gives us some utterly epic. There are all the evil Avengers, and you can note the non-woke time period in which this story was written. Take a look at the evil Avengers. Take a good, close look at a lot of them. You'll start to notice something, right? Here, and here, and here, and here, and here. What visually signifies that they're bad? They're foreign. They're not American. A lot of these Avengers are not American looking. Quite a few of them are Kree, but in addition to that, there are quite a few that have turbans that are from the Upper Africa or the Middle East. But the point is never made, so we won't stress it here. But Rick Jones calls all of the good Avengers from all kinds of different timelines, and there is an epic battle. And while that epic battle is raging, Kang is fighting his own transformation in some great panels where he just does not want to become. See, they're trying to make him become Immortus. And he says, I will not change. I will not do it. And they're insisting, and it looks like they might be winning, but eventually they don't. Eventually they don't win. Eventually Kang steps out of his previous self. There is a wet, pulpy tearing sound and an energy backlash that rocks the timekeepers. And when that backlash is over, Kang is himself again, and heavily armed. And he attacks the timekeepers. There's a point that he makes. Let's see here. The timekeepers say, we still have the power to escape. Kang says, well, well, well. Your gambit failed. Your boy sacrificed himself, but he destroyed your precious weapon, and that means... And the timekeepers are saying, no, no, we still have the power to escape. And Kang says, no, you considered yourself gods, timekeepers, unassailable. But in the end, you're only men. Men with powerful technology, with machines. And any machine can be beaten. Any defense overcome. Consider that, gentlemen, and give my regards to hell. When he's done, Kang conquers. His future has been eliminated. He watched them kill his future self. So he has a fresh, clean page. And these tyrants who were controlling the time stream are gone. He's killed them himself. So he is free to escape his destiny. Now, it turns out at the very end that Avengers Forever has one of the hallmarks of most great graphic novel runs, which is that everything is left more or less exactly the way it was when it started. It's not quite "it was all a dream," but if you think that the Time Crystal, or the Time Cannon, or the Timekeepers, or Immortus, or Kang aren't going to go right back to the way they were before this series, you'd be wrong. But it is fantastic. The story ends with Kang winning. The only battle in this storyline that he really cared about, which was not to become his puling, order-taking future self. He not only watches that future self die, but he kills the people who imposed that destiny on him, at least as far as he says. And he disappears. The Avengers don't get any kind of final reckoning with him. He will meet with them some other day. We get the sense from this miniseries that he really enjoys fighting with the Avengers, that it brings out the man of action in him. So when we finish with Avengers Forever, I can say, having reread it now carefully, panel by panel, and with that extra awareness that comes when you know you're reading it with someone who has no idea what's going on. Matthew doesn't have any idea what's going on, and no amount of reading this is going to help him with that. He's going to have to go back and read 250 issues of the Avengers carefully, and lots of spin-off issues as well. The Timekeepers, for instance, occur in a 4-issue story of Thor. There won't be in any Avengers Omnibus edition. Reading these things with that in mind really gave him a heightened awareness of this. I knew that Carlos Pacheco's artwork would win Matthew over. I knew that that would work because it's the best artwork of this artist's career. But reading the story, again, carefully, sitting down and reading it in little installments, I wasn't going ahead. I wasn't looking ahead to any previous week. Really gave me an appreciation for what Kurt Busiek does for Kang the Conqueror in this storyline. And it stays true right to the end. Kang is the only character in here who is consistently in character. Maybe Janet Van Dyne, the Wasp, maybe. But as is always the case with big mega events where a writer decides, I'm going to pick a weird, eclectic cast of core characters, that's always the case. I've mentioned Crisis on Infinite Earths. The writer did the same thing. He brought a cast of characters together for no other reason than because he felt like they'd make an interesting combination. Inevitably, when you have an everything is on the line, all the stakes in the world storyline like this, you're going to end up with crowds and crowds of superheroes on either side. That's just going to happen. So the quirky selection of Avengers from different time periods here, it loses its interest factor at about issue 4. And they're background figures by the end here. They do, all the extra Avengers that appear out of nowhere disappear into nowhere. But at the end, they do. And we're left with our core cast of Avengers. But even so, your interest in that long since has faded, I would think. Certainly in my case, reading this again, my interest was entirely on Kang. On Kang steadfastly refusing to become his future self. He rejects his preset destiny. And that is a wonderful character story. That's wonderfully done. So anyway, that ends Avengers Forever. I will leave a link to Matthew's video down below. He titles his video, This Insanity is Finally Over, or something like that. I laughed out loud when I saw that. And sooner or later, Michael K. Vaughan will weigh in on this final selection. I doubt he'll ever do a read-along with Matthew and I again. But that is Avengers Forever, perhaps the least comprehensible major Avengers storyline ever written, because it's the only one that was written without a net, entirely for longtime Avengers fans. I don't believe that it is comprehensible to someone who is not, in a way that, for instance, Batman Year One is. And I think that I was proven right. I don't think it is comprehensible to someone who hasn't steeped themselves in Avengers lore. But we tried. We gave it a try. So that's our book for today. I will see you next week. Thank you, BookTube.